A terrified puppy bursts onto the sun-scorched road, forcing a young Marine to confront a moment that feels like danger, destiny, and a silent cry for help all at once. What begins as a quiet summer walk soon leads him into a hidden struggle, a wounded mother dog, a brave pup, and a rescue that changes everything he thought he knew. As their lives intertwine, a bond of loyalty, healing, and God's quiet miracles forms, guiding them toward a new family born from compassion and courage. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to follow more inspiring stories of hope, faith, and the extraordinary moments hidden in everyday life. The Charleston shoreline simmered beneath the blazing summer sun, each gust of wind carrying the scent of warm salt and distant tides. Lance Cooper walked along the narrow coastal road with the slow, measured stride of a soldier who had only recently learned to breathe like a civilian again. At 30, he carried the rugged look of a man shaped by deserts, jungles, oceans, and too many nights awake. His jaw was sharp, darkened by a faint stubble he never fully shaved off. His eyes, steel blue with a shadowed ring beneath them, held the kind of alertness that no amount of peace could erase. The Marines had molded him into something enduring, but the battles had carved quiet fault lines inside him that only he could feel. Today, he wore a simple olive t-shirt and faded tactical pants, his old military backpack hanging off one shoulder. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck, but he welcomed the burn. It reminded him he was alive. Beside him trotted Bruno, his 4-year-old German shepherd and partner in more missions than Lance cared to count. Bruno was large for his breed, with thick black and tan fur, dark, intelligent eyes, and a scar over his left shoulder from a blast that still haunted Lance in flashes. The dog walked with discipline, but also with a subtle softness reserved only for Lance. In public, Bruno looked like a guardian forged from instinct. But with Lance, he was gentler, almost human in the way he leaned his head toward his partner whenever he sensed tension building inside the man. The road curved around the edge of a quiet summer neighborhood. Palm trees shimmered in the heat. Cars passed occasionally, but the world felt unusually still, as if taking a breath before something shifted. Lance had taken this walk countless times since returning home, but today his pulse beat differently. Something in the pit of his stomach nudged him, a feeling he'd learned never to ignore. It was the same feeling he got seconds before a sand dune erupted under enemy fire, or when a night patrol suddenly fell silent. It was intuition sharpened by years of surviving what others did not. He glanced down at Bruno. "You feel that too, buddy?" Bruno didn't bark, but his ears twitched. He slowed for a moment, sniffed the air, then continued walking with renewed focus. That told Lance everything he needed to know. His dog sensed it too. Something was off. Lance took in his surroundings again, slower this time, the sound of the waves rolling against the beach, the distant chatter from a pier where tourists bought cold lemonade, the creak of an old fishing boat swaying by the docks. Everything looked normal, yet the hairs on Lance's arms stood up. A memory surfaced. A humid night in Fallujah. A wall that shouldn't have been quiet. A dog's sudden growl. A split-second decision that saved a platoon. He exhaled hard through his nose, pushing the memory back into its locked place. "Just a walk," he whispered to himself. "That's all this is." But fate rarely cared what a man wanted. A small sound broke the air behind him, soft, quick, rhythmic, like someone stepping lightly, almost skipping. Lance stopped. Bruno froze instantly, body stiff, ears forward in a perfect line of alertness. Lance turned slowly. every muscle primed though he tried to look casual. Civilians always panicked when they saw a Marine tense up. The road was empty, but the feeling remained. Then it came again. A faint rustling, the tiniest shuffle on hot pavement. Almost playful, but trembling. Bruno growled under his breath, but not in warning, more like confusion. Lance stepped forward. "Hello, someone there?" No answer. He took another step, the sun glaring off the asphalt. Heat waves wavered like ghosts. Bruno moved beside him, muscles rippling, tail low but not tucked. Something small darted out from behind a recycling bin near a palm tree. Lance's breath caught. A puppy, a tiny German shepherd pup, no more than 2 months old, stumbled into the road as if the heat had drained every ounce of strength. Its fur was dusty, matted with sand and tangled strands of dried grass. Its ears were too big for its head and drooped to the sides. And its eyes, wide, dark, glistening with fear, locked onto Lance as though it had finally found what it had been looking for. The pup tried to bark, but it came out as a weak squeak before it collapsed into a sitting position, panting furiously. Lance raised both hands slightly, lowering his voice the way he'd been taught when calming wounded dogs in the field. "Hey there, little guy. You lost?" Bruno lowered his head, sniffing cautiously. The puppy took a shaky step toward him, then another toward Lance, as if torn between the two protectors towering above it. Lance knelt slowly, the sun beating onto his back. His shadow stretched over the puppy like a shield. It didn't run. It didn't flinch. It only trembled, staring at him with a plea no language could express. Lance felt something tug deep inside his chest, a pull he didn't welcome, but couldn't ignore. The kind that told him this wasn't just a lost puppy. There was a reason it had found him. He reached out his hand, palm up. The puppy sniffed the air, took one more hesitant step, then froze again as if remembering something terrifying. Then it did something unexpected. It turned away, whimpered, looked over its shoulder at Lance, and gave the smallest nod of its head. A gesture that was almost human. Bruno barked once, sharp and decisive. Lance's throat tightened. He understood. This little one wants us to follow. The puppy let out a soft cry and began walking, leading toward the narrow footpath that disappeared into the line of swaying palm trees. Lance rose to his feet, and for the first time all morning, the unease in his gut shifted into something else. Purpose. He adjusted his backpack strap. "All right, buddy," he whispered to Bruno. "Let's see where this takes us." And with the summer sun blazing behind them, the Marine, his loyal partner, and a trembling little pup stepped off the safe road and into the unknown. It was the beginning of something none of them could yet name. But Lance felt it, like a warm tide pulling him in. Something was waiting. Something important. The security office felt colder than the winter storm outside. A square room of muted gray walls and humming fluorescent lights that cast a pale glow across the metal table in the center. It was the kind of room built for order and interrogation, not for children with trembling shoulders and grief too old for their age. Lily Carter sat in the middle of it, her small hands gripping the purple backpack as if it were the last warm thing in her world. She was still wearing her pink winter coat, its fur-lined hood slightly damp from melted snow. Her blonde hair, soft and thin like strands of corn silk, framed a face round with innocence yet tightened by sorrow. The redness beneath her eyes revealed she had been crying long before the dogs approached her. Will Harper took the seat across from her, lowering himself slowly. His joints ached from old injuries, but the ache inside his chest was sharper. He had seen children in war zones before, children whose expressions were eerily similar to Lily's. That same hollowed look, that same distant fear. He hated seeing it here, in a place meant for safety. Hunter stood outside the locked glass door, pacing in slow, deliberate circles. His thick tail hung low, and every few seconds he pressed his nose to the glass, whining with a soft, quivering sound that echoed down the hallway. Two security officers watched him warily, unsure whether to restrain him or let him be. Hunter had never acted like this, not even when gunfire tore through a battlefield years ago. A woman in her mid-30s stepped inside. She introduced herself as Officer Maria Stevens, the airport's lead security supervisor. Maria had olive-toned skin, dark eyes, and hair pulled into a sharp ponytail. She carried herself with calm authority, the kind built through years of handling emergencies without losing her composure. Her uniform fit neatly against her athletic frame, and the rectangular badge on her chest glinted under the cold lighting. She studied Lily for a moment, her expression softening, and then turned to Will. "We sealed the hallway. No one comes in or out until we understand what triggered the dogs." Will nodded. "It's not aggression. You can feel it. They're responding to something personal." Maria crossed her arms. "Personal doesn't cause trained K9 units to break formation simultaneously." "It does," Will said quietly, "if the memory behind that scent runs deeper than their training." Maria looked at him with confusion, but said nothing. Will leaned slightly forward, turning his attention to Lily. "Sweetheart, earlier you said your dad is inside your bag." He kept his voice gentle, the way someone speaks to a fragile animal. "Can you tell me what you meant?" Lily hesitated. Her lips pressed tightly together, and she sniffed once before whispering, "I don't want anyone to take him." "We won't take him," Will said. "I promise. But we need to understand." Lily's small fingers trembled as she slowly placed the backpack onto the table. Maria stepped closer but remained silent. Will slid the backpack gently toward himself, giving Lily time to stop him if she chose. She didn't. Instead, she closed her eyes, as if bracing for a painful memory. Will unzipped the bag. The quiet room grew even quieter. Inside lay a small metal tin. Its edges were scratched, the lid slightly dented as if it had been handled through years of service. Wrapped carefully around it was an American flag, folded into a tight triangle. The fabric was faded along the seams, and the faint scent of smoke and pine clung to it, a scent that made Hunter scratch harder at the door. Beside the tin sat a police badge, old and worn, the engraved number barely visible but still carrying a silent dignity. And tucked into the corner, encased in a glass vial, was a fine gray powder. Ashes. Maria covered her mouth. "Oh, God." Will exhaled slowly. Every muscle in his body went still. He lifted the tin with reverent care. "Lily, whose things are these?" She opened her eyes and stared at the items. For a moment she looked older, as if grief had aged her years ahead of time. "My dad," she whispered. "Sergeant Jacob Carter." Will blinked, stunned. "Jacob Carter?" Lily nodded. The name struck him like a physical blow. Jacob Carter had been a K9 sergeant with a reputation built on courage and loyalty. He had been the kind of man who inspired rookies and comforted frightened civilians in the same calm breath. Will had met him once during a joint training session years ago. Carter had a square jaw, deep-set brown eyes, and a smile that made people feel safe. He carried kindness like armor and discipline like a second skin. 6 months ago, Will had heard rumors of his death, a rescue mission gone wrong near Colorado Springs, a collapsed building, an explosion. But he had not known the details, and he had never known Carter had a daughter. Hunter suddenly barked outside the door, a deep and pained sound. His paws scratched at the glass as he pressed his body against it, desperate to get inside. Will understood. Hunter remembered the scent. Carter had once trained with Will's unit, and Hunter had interacted with him more than once. Dogs never forgot people who treated them with respect and affection. The scent on the flag and ashes must have awakened old memories, the same way a melody or photo could resurrect a person for humans. Will set the items down gently. "Lily, why are you carrying these alone?" She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Mom said Dad's heart belonged on the snowy hill near Dillon Lake. She said that's where he'd want to rest." Her voice cracked. "She couldn't come. She cries every time she talks about him. So I wanted to take him myself. I just wanted him to go home." Will felt his throat tighten. There was bravery in Lily's eyes, a stubborn courage that mirrored the strength Carter was known for. Yet, beneath it was a deep ache, the kind that could twist a child's understanding of the world. Maria looked shaken. "You're telling me these dogs recognized the scent of their old handler from his ashes?" "They did," Will replied. "And so did Hunter." Hunter barked again, softer this time, a whimper woven into the sound. Maria hesitated, then walked to the door and unlocked it. Hunter barreled inside, but instead of approaching Will, he went straight to Lily. He lowered his head and pressed his large body against her small frame, whining softly, as if apologizing for scaring her. Lily froze at first, then placed a shaking hand on his fur. When Hunter lifted a paw and rested it gently on her knee, she finally broke into sobs. Will watched the moment with a heaviness in his chest. Jacob Carter's memory had bound them all in a way that defied logic. The dogs had acted not out of fear, but recognition. And now, standing in the cold light of the room, Will understood that the past was not finished with any of them. He placed a hand on the tin. "These aren't just ashes, they're a call home." And that was exactly where the chapter closed. The stretcher wobbled slightly as Lance Cooper and Sarah Whitmore carried the injured shepherd mother through the thinning shade of the coastal woods. The heat outside the tree line was growing harsher, a searing wall of summer air waiting to swallow them once they stepped out from beneath the rustling canopy. Bruno walked close beside Lance, his eyes darting from tree to tree, hyper-aware of every sound. The small pup clung to his heels, no longer leading the way, but staying protectively near the only beings he trusted. The pup's fur was still dusty and matted, yet his eyes held a stubborn spark, a young survivor refusing to give up. Lance tightened his grip on the stretcher handles. His arms strained, but he welcomed the weight. Carrying another life was something he understood deeply. In the Marines, he had carried wounded comrades through hostile terrain, felt their breaths weaken, felt their hope flicker. Some survived, some didn't. The memory of one man in particular, Sergeant Blake Norris, tall, loud, always cracking jokes until a roadside explosion stole his voice forever, flashed through his mind. Lance blinked hard and focused on the present. Not today. Today he was carrying someone who still had a fighting chance. Ahead of him, Sarah moved with controlled urgency. Sweat trickled down her temples, darkening her sunburned skin. She wasn't just someone who worked with animals. She moved with the determination of a woman who had spent years responding to distress calls from both people and creatures alike. Her life had shaped her into a steady, capable force. someone who ran toward problems, not away from them. They reached the edge of the woods, where a narrow dirt path curved toward the parking lot overlooking the shimmering blue of Charleston's shoreline. The sun hit them like a furnace as they stepped into the open. Lance shielded the mother dog with his body to block direct sunlight. Sarah quickened her pace toward a rescue vehicle parked under a cluster of crooked palm trees. The truck belonged to Charleston Wildlife Rescue, painted a faded white with hand-drawn paw prints from a community event years before. Draped inside the truck's open back was a carefully arranged medical setup. Water containers, blankets, IV fluids, and emergency kits. As they approached, the wildlife technician beside the truck turned toward them. He was a lean man in his early 40s, with close-cropped sandy hair and spectacles reflecting the bright sunlight. He wore khaki trousers, a navy polo with the rescue logo, and heavy gloves tucked into his belt. His name patch read, Mark Dalton. Mark's face was lined, not from age but from years under the sun and countless long days on rescue operations. He had an air of quiet patience mixed with a no-nonsense professionalism that came from a past career in the Coast Guard, one he rarely talked about, though the disciplined way he stood gave it away. Mark stepped forward and lifted the tarp. "Sarah, you radioed for assistance? What have we got?" Sarah motioned at the stretcher. "Adult female German Shepherd. Severe wounds, dehydration, probable fracture. She's critical but holding on." Mark's posture straightened. His eyes softened as he inspected the mother dog. "Poor girl. Let's get her stable." Bruno stepped aside as Mark and Sarah lifted the stretcher into the truck. The pup whimpered at the sudden separation and tried to climb after his mother, but his tiny legs slid on the metal step. Lance caught him gently. "Easy, buddy. She's right here." The pup squirmed but eventually settled against Lance's chest, small body trembling with exhaustion and worry. Lance could feel the rapid beat of its heart. Fast, frantic, but alive. Inside the truck, Sarah began cleaning the dog's wounds more thoroughly while Mark prepared an IV line. He worked with practiced precision. "She's lucky you found her when you did," he said without looking up. "Another few hours in this heat." His unfinished sentence hung heavily in the air. Lance swallowed hard. "The pup let us." Mark raised his brows. "Smart one." Lance nodded. "Brave, too." As the mother dog received fluids, her chest began rising more steadily. Her ears twitched weakly at the sound of her pup's soft cries. The pup lifted his head, responding instantly, reaching his tiny paws toward her. Sarah smiled faintly. "They're fighters. The bond is strong." Lance studied the pup more carefully. He was young, maybe 2 months, but there was something fierce hidden beneath his fragility. The way he had run through the heat, the way he refused to rest until someone followed him. It spoke of a spirit Lance recognized, a spirit he had once needed to survive. Mark finished stabilizing the mother dog and stepped out of the truck, wiping his forehead with a rag. "All right. We need to get her to the clinic immediately. I'll drive. Sarah, you ride with her." Then he looked at Lance with a raised eyebrow. "And you, Marine, right?" Lance nodded reluctantly. Mark chuckled softly. "It's obvious. The posture gives it away." Lance forced a modest shrug. "Old habits." "Good habits," Mark corrected. "We could use someone steady like you following behind. The clinic's not far, but traffic's unpredictable this time of day. Heat does strange things to people's patience." Lance agreed without hesitation. He placed the pup inside the truck beside Bruno, who lay down protectively. The pup curled against Bruno's front leg, closing his eyes briefly as if knowing he was finally safe. The rescue vehicle pulled away first. Lance jogged to his motorcycle, a matte black bike with worn leather saddlebags, and started the engine. The rumble vibrated through him, grounding him. As he followed behind the rescue truck, weaving through Charleston's summer traffic, he thought about the strange chain of events that had led him here. A walk meant to relieve his mind had turned into something else entirely. By the time they reached the clinic, a small building near the marina with aquamarine walls and a big paw print logo, Lance felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper on his shoulders. Inside, the veterinary team moved quickly. The clinic's lead veterinarian, Dr. Helen Brooks, appeared from the back room. She was a kindly woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a bun, soft brown eyes, and a calm presence that made even frightened animals relax. Helen had worked in Charleston her entire life and carried the gentle authority of someone who had seen hundreds of rescues, heartbreaks, and miracles. "Bring her in," Helen instructed. "We'll take care of her." As the mother dog was wheeled toward surgery, the pup barked anxiously until Bruno pressed his nose to him, soothing him. Lance stood by, strangely still, as if anchored to the floor. Sarah touched his arm lightly. "You did good out there." He met her eyes and saw the truth in her expression. Gratitude, respect, and something deeper forming quietly. She continued, "Sometimes the right people are in the right place at the right time." Lance looked at the pup curled against Bruno, and then at the door where the mother dog had disappeared. A sense of purpose washed over him, steady and warm beneath the chaotic swirl of the day. In the quietest corners of his heart, he knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The chapter closes with Lance, Bruno, the pup, Sarah, and Mark standing together in the clinic waiting room. 5 lives briefly united by fate and about to be changed by what comes next. The sun over Charleston had dipped just enough to cast long amber streaks across the marina, softening the summer heat, but doing nothing to ease the tension in the veterinary clinic. Lance Cooper paced along the polished floor, boots thudding in a steady, anxious rhythm. The scent of antiseptic hung in the air, faint yet intrusive. Hospital smells, whether for humans or animals, always brought memories he preferred buried. Memories of field hospitals lit by dim lamps, of frantic hands trying to keep fading lives from slipping away. Bruno lay at his feet, massive head resting on his paws, amber eyes lifting now and then to reassure his partner. The little pup, exhausted from the ordeal in the woods, slept curled in a towel-lined corner. Lance kept glancing toward the surgery doors. Inside, Dr. Helen Brooks and her team worked in complete focus. The mother dog's condition was more severe than he had realized. He clenched his jaw. He should have gotten her help faster. He knew better than to blame himself, but guilt had always come naturally to him. Just as he drew in a breath to steady his thoughts, the clinic door slid open. A gust of warm air swept in along with a young woman whose presence seemed to shift the entire room. Eliza Liz Hayes stepped into the clinic as if she brought light with her. She looked to be around 28, tall and striking, with sun-kissed skin and long waves of blonde hair that glowed like pale gold under the warm overhead lights. Her frame was athletic but graceful, and her pale blue eyes flashed with a fiery mix of intelligence and empathy. She wore a fitted navy rescue vest over a white tank top, and her denim shorts revealed toned legs that hinted at long hours hiking coastal trails for rescue missions. Liz had a kind of natural confidence, bold, warm, a spark in human form. But beneath her brightness, Lance sensed something else too. A depth, a history, as though she had known loss and fought her way back from it. Sarah Whitmore immediately waved her over. "Liz, you made it." Liz's eyes scanned the room and fell on Lance and Bruno. Her voice softened immediately. "You're the Marine who carried her out?" Lance nodded, feeling oddly self-conscious under her clear gaze. "Yes." She was in bad shape, but the pup, he found us. Wouldn't stop until we followed him. A look of deep admiration crossed her face, softening her features. "That's incredible. Dogs always know who to trust, and today, they chose right." She knelt beside the sleeping pup, brushing a gentle thumb across his dusty forehead. The pup stirred, blinked up at her, and with a trembling little whine climbed directly into her lap, as though he had been waiting for her all along. Bruno shifted, watching her quietly, and Lance sensed that the big shepherd approved. A rare honor. Liz looked up at Lance again, her voice carrying a mix of emotion and certainty. "You didn't just rescue her. You rescued both of them." Before Lance could reply, the surgery doors opened. Dr. Helen Brooks stepped out, her scrubs marked with light smudges of dried blood and antiseptic. She was exhausted, years of experience etched into the fine wrinkles around her eyes. But she wore a faint, triumphant smile. "She made it," Helen announced gently. "It was close, but she's strong. Remarkably strong." A collective breath left the room. Even Bruno exhaled, resting his head again. Lance asked quietly, "She will recover?" Helen nodded. "With time, treatment, and care. She's stable now. The worst is behind her." Sarah let out a sigh of relief and leaned against the counter. Mark, who had been organizing medical supplies, froze in place with a grateful nod. "But Liz..." She stepped forward, voice trembling the slightest bit. "Thank you, Dr. Brooks." Helen gently squeezed her shoulder. "It wasn't only me. The timing saved her. Another hour out there." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Liz turned to Lance. Her eyes were glassy, filled with a depth of emotion that startled him. "You didn't just bring her in," she whispered. "You brought in hope. You saved a family that was barely holding on." The intensity of her words struck him with unexpected force. He tried to speak, but only managed a quiet, "I just did what anyone would have done." Liz shook her head slowly. "No. Most people would have walked by. You listened." She glanced down at the tiny pup curled safely in her arms. "And he trusted you first." Bruno sat closer to Lance, as if sensing the shift in the air. The room fell into a warm quiet, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and the rhythmic breathing of the animals around them. Lance felt something shift inside him, like a door opening after years of being sealed shut. Since returning from deployment, he had lived with a sense of disconnection, like the world was moving forward while he stayed behind. But now, looking at this fragile pup, at Bruno, at Liz with her bright strength, something stirred, something warm, something alive. Liz straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "She'll need care for weeks," she said softly. "The kind of care that's not just medical, but emotional." Lance knew what she meant. He had seen wounded souls before, some with fur, some without. The mother dog would survive, but her heart needed healing too. Liz stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're already part of their story, Lance." He didn't argue, because in the quiet corner of his heart, he felt it too. As the evening light faded, the small group stood together. Lance, Bruno, Liz, Sarah, Mark, drawn into the gravity of what had happened that day. And for the first time since he'd come home, Lance felt the steady burn of something powerful returning to him. Purpose. Hope. And maybe, the beginning of something even deeper. The chapter closes with Lance watching Liz cradle the pup, Bruno lying protectively at his side, and the knowledge settling deep inside him that their lives would never return to what they were before this day. The late summer skies over Charleston glowed in soft amber as the weeks unfolded, each day weaving Lance Cooper, Bruno, Liz Hayes, the recovering shepherd mother, and her brave little pup closer together. The veterinary clinic had become a second home, a safe harbor where healing, both visible and invisible, took its slow and steady course. Every morning after his training runs along the shoreline, Lance stopped by the clinic. He always arrived early, stepping quietly through the glass doors, letting the warmth of the place wash over him. The reception area always held a familiar mix of scents: antiseptic, dog shampoo, and the faint sweetness of the lavender diffuser Dr. Helen liked to use. It was oddly calming. Bruno padded beside him, tail swaying gently, his deep brown eyes lighting up the moment he heard the little pup's excited whimpers from the back room. The pup, now stronger, fuller, and brighter, would tumble out of his enclosure the second he saw them. His coat had regained its soft shine, a warm blend of tan and black, and his legs, once shaky, now danced with endless enthusiasm. The mother dog, though still keeping weight off her injured leg, had regained her regal composure. Her eyes were more alert now, soft but wise, carrying the kind of strength earned through surviving the harshest circumstances. She greeted Lance each day by nudging her head against his hand, an act that somehow always steadied him deep inside. Liz was there most days, sometimes already tending to the dogs when Lance arrived, sometimes arriving minutes later with her hair tied up messily, smelling faintly of salted air and sunscreen. Liz's presence grew more familiar with each passing day. Her laughter echoed warmly through the clinic halls, lifting the tension from everyone around her. She had a way of brightening a room simply by stepping into it, and her kindness, genuine, unforced, seemed to reach both people and animals like a soft light. She had moved to Charleston years before to work with the rescue team, leaving behind a life in Phoenix after losing her younger brother in a hiking accident. The grief had reshaped her, deepening her compassion and sharpening her resolve to never ignore a cry for help again, human or animal. Lance felt that quiet resilience every time she spoke. Some afternoons, the small group gathered behind the clinic on the wooden deck overlooking the marina. Dr. Helen Brooks, still steady and gentle in her 60s, often joined them with iced tea in hand, hair pulled into a tidy silver bun. She'd tell stories about rescues she had performed decades ago, her voice soft but filled with hard-earned wisdom. Sarah Whitmore, the athletic ranger with sharp instincts and sun-kissed skin, occasionally stopped by after patrols. And Mark Dalton, the Coast Guard-turned-rescue technician, would swing in with medical supplies or awkward jokes that only landed half the time, but still made everyone smile. The mother dog, now affectionately named Shadow, rested peacefully each day while the pup, nicknamed Bright by Liz because he's like a little sunbeam, frolicked under the afternoon light. Bruno tolerated Bright's endless attempts to climb on him, tug his tail, and shove toys at his paws. The big shepherd remained steadfast and patient, occasionally placing a single large paw on Bright's back to calm him down. Lance watched these interactions with a quietly growing warmth. He wasn't used to this kind of slow peace, this steady unfolding of a life he never expected to have. It wasn't just the dogs, it was Liz, too. Something about the way she looked at him, with soft understanding rather than the guarded caution others used with veterans, made him feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. One golden evening, the clinic closed early. The five of them lingered on the deck: Lance, Liz, Bruno, Shadow, and Bright. The sky rippled with hues of honey and rose as the sun sank toward the ocean. The air was warm but breezy, carrying the salt of the Atlantic. Liz sat cross-legged beside Bright, stroking his ears. Lance leaned against the railing, arms crossed loosely as he watched the peaceful scene before him. For a moment, it felt like everything had fallen into place. Every loss he had endured, every mile he had walked alone, had led him to this soft, glowing moment. Liz glanced up at him. "You're quieter today." "Just thinking," he replied. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "About what?" "How far they've come." He nodded toward Shadow and Bright. "How close we all are now." Liz smiled gently, her golden hair catching the last glimmer of sunlight. "Healing tends to bring people together." He looked at her fully then, something unspoken flowing between them in a warm, steady current. His chest felt lighter, less shielded. He exhaled slowly. "Liz, do you think we could give them a home? Both of them?" The question hung in the warm air, not rushed, not anxious, just honest. Liz's eyes softened as she rose to her feet and stepped closer, Bright tumbling after her. Her smile, bright, warm, tender, lit her whole face. "Only if we raise them together." The words hit Lance like a warm tide, a permission he hadn't known he needed. A crack inside his heart finally opened, letting light in. Bruno nudged his leg approvingly. Shadow rested her head on the deck with a calm sigh. Bright yipped happily, as if he understood everything. And Liz. She stood close enough for Lance to feel the steady warmth radiating from her. A family, unexpected, unplanned, but perfect, had begun to form. Not through blood, not through chance, but through the fierce loyalty of a tiny pup who refused to give up, through a wounded mother who fought to survive, through a soldier learning to hope again, and through a woman whose heart had learned to mend what was broken. The chapter closes with the five of them standing together in the amber glow of the Charleston sunset. A new family, born from summer heat, ocean breezes, and the unbreakable courage of a little dog. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder from the sky or angels descending in blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, through a wounded dog who refuses to give up, a loyal Marine learning to open his heart again, or a young woman who shows up at the exact moment hope is fading. And maybe, just maybe, God writes these moments long before we ever walk into them. Maybe He places the right souls on our path, human or animal, when we need them most. In our daily lives, we often rush, worry, and forget that heaven still moves gently around us. But stories like this one remind us that compassion is never wasted, kindness is never forgotten, and love, no matter how small, can change the world for someone. If this story touched your heart, take a second to share it with someone who might need a little reminder that miracles are real. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, faith, and the quiet ways God still works in our world. May God bless you, your loved ones, and every soul, human or animal, still searching for light in the middle of their own storm. May His grace guide you, protect you, and fill your home with peace.